Welcome to the A.Little.Mental podcast, the place where you can find credible information, resources, and community to help you reach wellness a little mental at a time. I'm your host and founder, Morgan Reed, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into it. On today's episode, we are going to be joined by Dr. George James. Dr. George James is a licensed marriage and family therapist who counsels people on how to overcome everyday relational struggles and build successful connections in love, family, and career. With a practical approach to relationships and life, Dr. James helps bring success to those he influences. He works extensively with professional athletes, entertainers, adult men and women, couples, executives, and young adult men on a variety of issues. This includes topics like adulting, anxiety, communication, depression, parenting, work-life balance, leadership, and love life. I am so excited for today's episode. Before we jump into it, Dr. George James, do you have anything you want to add or expand on before we get into things?
Oh, I'm excited too. I'm looking forward to the conversation. And if I'm expanding about some of the stuff I do, which I'll talk a little bit more of, I love blending in terms of encouraging people about mental health, letting people know about mental health, but also being able to take mental health in other spaces. So for me, that's been a big part of my practice, not just in the room, not just around other therapists, but bringing mental health to business, to sports, to entertainment. And that's a big part of my work and my brand. And we'll talk more about that. Let's get into it. I'm excited.
Yes. I am just as excited. So we have been working together. I think we did the math a little while ago, maybe like 7 or 8 years or so. 7 years?
No. Oh, well, I mean, this is where we gotta be able to like name how long have you been on independent, and then add some years to that.
Very true.
I feel like it's close to 10, but
that's true.
I'd be adding years.
That is true. I don't think it's 10. I think because that's crazy. 10 for me to do anything is still crazy for me. Yeah, I think I started with you my sophomore year of college.
Yeah.
And that has not been 10 years. So I rebuke that.
Okay. All right. I'm just trying to say, I mean, it's been a minute.
It's been a minute. We'll call it a minute. It's been a minute. And so one of my questions for you is, how do you feel like, and obviously I can also add input too, or say, no, it's not. But how do you feel like our relationship has evolved over our minute of time here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. And one of the things that I love about doing therapy or being able to support people or coach folks, I was actually just thinking about this, a client that I saw last night, and I started seeing him his freshman year of college, and now he graduated. I'm like, I've spoken to this dude every week for the past 4 years, maybe give or take 6 weeks in that time frame. I'm like, that's a lot of time.
A lot of time.
And so when I think about you and I, yeah, I've had that. Like, we've had moments where it's been every week, every other week. Mm-hmm. When we take that minute that we've had, mm-hmm. I've seen you kind of not know all the things that's happening to you, as smart as you are and aware as you are, not knowing all the things, to like now we like just like we can talk about the triggers, we can talk about the themes, but yet there's still ways for us to dig deeper. So I've seen you evolve into your whole person. I've seen you evolve into the way you think about things, the way you are able to identify these themes. And even now, like the stuff you'll say of like, yeah, I know what I did, but like, leave me alone, right? Like, so I think that part is pretty cool for me.
Yeah, I think that definitely means a lot. I think, I talked a lot over the season around the raising of awareness, and it can take a minute. And like you said, when you're meeting with somebody, and I will readily admit that we didn't necessarily meet every week. It's been sporadic. The minute has ebbed and flowed.
Which is what happens over a course of time. I mean, like, I think in the early phases, we spent some consistent time together.
Oh, yeah. First few years was every week. And you're like, even though I'm not supposed to do every week, we got to get every weekend. Just get you in there. Which was super helpful, and a reality, I think, for a lot of folks who are in college or trying to transition out of college, where you might have that support, but you might have it for a limited time, or you might not know how to transition out of it because the resources that you had in college may not necessarily be available to you once you get out. Like that person, that therapist may not be available to you. And I think that was probably when I took a couple years off to kind of figure out what life was ever so slightly.
So life hit you in the face.
So life smacked me in the face and I was like, hey, knock, 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 knock. Remember me? You got any openings?
But even with that, like I think for me in my own development, one of the things I tell people about being a therapist, especially a Black therapist, a Black male therapist, is that part of it is providing for your family, which is making money.
Yeah.
But the more you charge, the more you price people out. And sometimes the people I've priced out are younger folks, people who don't have access to a lot of money, and sometimes folks of color. So I've had to figure out, how do I still meet that? And you were around the group of people where I started to experiment. And I started with the college rate. And
locked it
it's
in.
not close to my normal rate. And it's only because we had history. But it was because of that, because you graduate and you're like, I don't have money to live, much less for therapy. So to try to bridge that a bit, and I think like it worked, or it felt like it.
No, and I really do. I greatly appreciated it. Still appreciate it as life still ebbs and flows. I have not moved. I'll make that very clear. When people are like, "Oh my God, I want to see Dr. George," you can. You do not get the same rate I do. And I have recommended you to many people. And that is the first thing I say. He's great. And we will not have the same rate. But I think for folks who did have access to you and do have access to therapists in college, it is such an incredible lifeline to be able to have a therapist who understands that balance, right? That understand the balance of not having access to funds, that transition. There's so many things that are happening. And I think that was like when I came back to you, I was like, so here's what happened the last couple years. And I tried to like pack in like a year, 2 years worth of life into like a single session. For you, what does it feel like to kind of start back again with a client and get that kind of like abrasive catch up and try to reset, reground, and move forward?
Yeah, the interesting thing about it, but I think it's one of my gifts, my abilities, is to remember, right? And like I had the weirdest times, like I'll remember like a client's dog, like the name of their dog. And I'll ask them, so how is Lucky doing? I'm like, I don't remember like your partner's name. I don't remember like anything else, but somehow I remember your dog.
I need to figure out what's going on with Lucky.
And so, like, when you did come back and you shared that, there were things that like already made sense, right? Like I knew about family, I knew about school, I knew about some of your friends, right? So like some things were already there, and like you sharing would trigger that and bring that up for me in my memory. And then some things I'm like, oh, I didn't remember it quite that way. And then you'd fill in the gap. But what I think has been great is that when you've like known somebody for a period of time, the story sounds familiar and feels familiar, even though you're catching me up on life. Right. It's like someone you've known for a while, and it doesn't take much to feel like you're back in rhythm. And I would have clients that would say this to me, but as a therapist, I have seen the value of not having to start over. Like I get that some people need someone fresh, a different perspective, a different vantage point. And sometimes that's why you go to a different therapist. But I totally get the reason why people come back to someone they've seen before, because they have context, they understand it. And I think that's what I felt is like, yeah, I remember when you told me that happened that year, or I remember that happened. Like, oh, really? Oh, that's a twist. Because I know some parts of you, I'm like, well, how did that work? Like, tell me, how did you reconcile this part of you to make this happen? Because it's a journey.
Yeah, I think I still remember that first session back, and you were like, okay, so we have some developments. Let's walk it out. Let's walk every last piece of this out.
Tell me how that happened.
No, right. Like, let's really talk about each and individual decision that led us to this conclusion, because I understand why everyone's confused. And so
I actually appreciated that you trusted me with that, because, once again, when you're in the therapy relationship, you could also project some things onto the person. Will this person judge me? Will this person look down on me? Will this person see me the way my parents see me, or community? And probably more about me than some other clients, right? You've interacted with me, you've been around me, and so you know parts of me that you could assume, yeah, I could see it in a negative way, but you didn't. And you were willing to share that and be open and vulnerable, which then allowed us, and I hope you felt that from me, that I can accept you and your thoughts and your actions, whatever they might be, and still work with you the way that we've always worked.
Yeah, and I think that it really was all that rapport that was built over those years, right? Of not knowing who I was, or just like going through the motions of being like, okay, this is a big life situation. I've made these decisions. I'm in this situation. I'm having these feelings and thoughts and stressors. And I got to a point in life where I was like, I actually don't have anybody in my life who I can talk to about all of this and who has the context so I don't have to restart and spend the first X amount of time explaining like, and, this is why my family's like this, and my brother's disabled, and, a suburban Black girl. Like, I didn't have to get into all the nuances of myself, which I know for a lot of people is oftentimes what keeps them from going to therapy or going to another therapist, because they're like, I just don't feel like explaining my whole life story all over again. So I definitely appreciated that. And I think that was a big part of it, where I'm like, he already knows enough about me, so he'll understand like the updates here and how insanely different my life is right now than what he knew me to be. And that's the shock factor I need. So he will understand why I'm having such a hard time processing, what I'm going through and coping with what life was throwing. And I think actually, in addition to that, I probably only saw you outside of college, maybe once, like that one time in person, maybe once or twice. And then the rest we went virtual. So how does that even feel, like transitioning from that physical space to the virtual space with either pre-existing clients or clients that you haven't even gotten a chance to really know yet?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Like throughout, the pandemic really kind of pushed that further. I was already doing some virtual work because I just have people who are just move and find me from different places. Like I had clients, especially when we talk about college age and beyond, that like had Fulbright scholarships and were originally in the area and then like went away for Fulbright, but wanted to still connect. And like literally we were finding different time zones. Or I had one client where his family, they were here, but then they moved to a whole nother country in a whole nother time zone. Wow. And wanted to touch base every now and then. So I think I was already experimenting with it. And I think with you and some others, it was the thought of like, yeah, I feel like we have that rapport. I feel like we can still like not only get deep and real like into all of the emotions, but then cut up and have a good time and laugh about some stuff. I mean, I think probably the last time we even met virtually, I told you like, you're not going to like this. and I said it and you didn't like it.
And I didn't.
But then we can then laugh about it. And so like, I think like the rapport feels like we were in the same room, right? Like It doesn't feel like it's changed for me. And that's just been my approach with like the virtual world. Like, yes, there's obviously some nuances. Like you don't see if I got slippers or socks on and I don't know, like all of that stuff. Or sometimes you can feel the energy in the room, but there have been times where I've felt when people have shifted virtually. I can feel it even throughout all the electronics and optic cables and all that other stuff. So I don't feel like has been that big of a difference.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And I didn't feel that on my end either. I think, like you said, because we had the rapport, and I think because I had touched base back with you in person too, that also helped because that kind of gave me that resetting and that grounding. So when we shifted to virtual, like you said, the nuances of both of our mannerisms, our rapport, how we interact with each other, that didn't really change across the virtual space. And that on top of that, which is even crazier, that's been maybe like another 3 years since we've been virtual. What do you feel like are the dynamics around, like having a bond and growing that, such a strong rapport with a client while also having to like keep up the boundaries that are, the ethical boundaries of therapist to client dynamics?
Well, obviously we're doing a podcast, so the boundaries with us are a little bit different.
A little hazy.
I'm not out in the streets talking well, no, I'm on the podcast talking your business. So I don't know. I don't know what the boundaries are. No, I think that we have figured out trust. I think that we figured out, which is the heart of this, of the work. I think there's trust between us. I think there's respect between us. And that even though you and I have created a unique relationship because of those circumstances, we understand college and the college university. We shared that experience. We also have other things that we shared. But we've been able to keep that, at bay. And my rule has always been that I tell people, look, I'm not going to tell anybody that I'm seeing you or working with you. That's on you. When I see you in person, I'm going to act as if like it would be normally. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to give you a hug, whatever we would normally do.
Right.
But if you want to tell people, that's on you. You can tell the whole world. It just won't come from me. And so it's always interesting when I hear from other people that, oh, yeah, you're seeing so-and-so. Oh, okay. I didn't know you knew, but all right, that's fine. And, I think that's one of the ways that I think I've tried to keep the boundaries where, I'm not going to do that. Right. But at the same time, you've been very open. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, I think both of us having that understanding. And I think for me also on at least the professional level, understanding the necessities, like what are the absolute necessities, being able to understand and just have that clarification. Because I think even when I saw you, I don't even know how long that was, but that was the first time I think I had seen you in person. We were on campus. And I think, like you said, for me to be as open as I am, like I said, having the podcast where I'm literally talking to you about my experience, it's safe to say that I am pretty open with my therapeutic experience. And I've really appreciated you still reaffirming that, like, I'm not going to name it unless you name it. I will match your energy because it still gives me that space to decide. And it still gives me that autonomy to decide, even though I'm at this point pretty much fair game here.
Even in, obviously this conversation, we've been talking about specifics that you and I know, and we pretty much know what we're talking about.
Yep.
And we're pretty deep in what we're talking about. Yep. But nobody knows because it's not all the specifics. And, I think that's a part of what that long-term relationship where we can say some stuff and we're like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And like you said, it's very, very helpful because I can be transparent. We can have these conversations. And even in session where I'm like, I don't feel like talking about that. And you're like, I know what you don't want to talk about. We're going to talk about it anyway. Or I'll let you slide today, where you can have some of either the tougher love, or you have a much better, I think, comprehensive understanding of when to push me, kind of like the type of reinforcement that I need, which again can end up both of us going like, all right, like you said, the last time we talked, you're like, you're really not going to like what I have to say. And I was like, you are correct. I did not like what you had to say. But those are things that we can be transparent about and still be okay. And honestly, I think it's because of our relationship that I am really such a proponent of the therapeutic dynamic and people getting into therapy, because I know it can be such a beautiful experience. And I also know that it took me work to even get to this point. And it took both of us putting in work to get to this point, because I don't even know if you know, but I went to like at least 2 other people before I ended up with you. I know. But yeah, and it was, again, exploring and figuring out what I needed. And I talk a lot about this in a different episode about, it's not always the identifiers that you can see that make it align, even though that is a safe and understandable strategy to use. But it's those softer things, like the fact that we, both went to PWIs, like we went to the same school, or the fact that, we both have this entrepreneurial side to us, or that we both had like a Christian upbringing, or, that we're both, high overachievers and do too much sometimes. Yep. So that, I think, a lot of times has been really what has built the rapport, strengthened the connection, and helped me understand, like, when you are telling me things or guiding me to certain conclusions, I'm like, I guess.
And I think, like, with that, it's also because of those things that we both know, you've also been open to when I share that, right? I don't share a lot of my life with my clients, although a lot of parts of my life is very public. So like, and I know my clients know stuff about me. I'm like, I'll look at my stories. I'm like, oh, all right, I am in a public setting, so I can't stop them from looking at my stories. And then they'll say like, so how was the vacation, or how are your kids doing? So there are parts of me that I know is public, and that's intentional. Mm-hmm. And I think because we know those parts of each other,
yeah,
I can share the therapeutic theme. I can share the look, I've been down that road and bumped my knee like 5 times. If you want to bump your knee, fine, but I'm just letting you know. Right. And so there's ways that I think our relationship has allowed all of that to be in our conversation and that you've been open and receptive to it.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'll say is that I think what people don't often talk about is that the therapist, and me in this case, I learned from you. Like I've learned things, that you shared. I've learned different ways of what's happening. I've been inspired, once again, talking about the entrepreneurial parts of us. I'm a cheerleader for you and the things that you are doing and aspire to do. And there's a way that there's a part of me that is excited for you even when we're, talking about some tough things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel that too. And I think I talked about it too in an earlier episode around like the balance between, pushing the introspective, deeper reflection and being like, okay, but what are we doing about this situation? Like, what are we actually doing? And pushing and really being in almost thought partnership around certain things, which I think has, again, the combination of that has been so helpful to me because I'm a very problem solving, solution oriented person. And like you said, there are some things that I have discovered and there is still some unearthing that is still happening as we speak. So it's been that combination to me as somebody who both quite literally has the educational degree and the personal experience is complex and complicated. So for you, what do you feel like helps you guide me through that? Like what helps you kind of get that ongoing intervention, solution, plan from week to week, month to month, year to year?
Yeah, I think the deeper answer of that is it depends on where we both are when we meet, right? Like, what else am I balancing and juggling? What are you balancing and juggling? But once again, I think it lands on our level of trust and rapport that we've built. And I think that even though when you don't want to, you will share what is happening or what has happened or what's present. And that always leads us to some other thing, right? And I feel like there are times where I have moments of brilliance in our sessions. And I'm like, all right, I'm just going to go with it. And then there are other times where I'm like, I hope she's getting some out of this, but let's see what happens. But we've had that enough that we could, continue to do it. And so I think from my side, I'm thinking about things you've shared and being able to come back to that is like, is this still where you are? How does this tie into this other theme? Like, I don't know what's going to happen in the session. Like I never do with my clients. But then once we get started, there are some places that we can always kind of, let's go to this door and open that. Let's go to that door and open that and see if it connects to what we're talking about. Last thing I'll say also, with what you're saying is I've always been someone that likes to offer practical and deep, right? And I've tried to be a thought partner with my clients because sometimes that's what I want and need. Mm-hmm. And then there's sometimes like, no, we gotta go in on this. And I love that you've been open to that where there's times where like, okay, what's the practical thing that we need to do? Who's the person you need to talk to? Let's get this number and like talk about that. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, you know what you're doing, right? Let's talk more about what's happening there.
Yeah, which is ironic, not ironically, it's very much in line with we have a session tomorrow, guys. So it's very much going to be one of those like, so I knew what I was doing. I knew where I was. So we're going to put points in that column. The awareness was awareing. And we may or may not have some things to unpack as a result. So it's balancing the
power. Like I know I'm aware, but I'm going to veto all.
I'm going to veto all of it, and bring it right here for you to just sort through the chaos of what happened. Yeah, but that's I'll even text you. I'll be like, "Hey, you ready? Like coming in hot."
And even that too. I think that. And I don't know, there's some therapists who do this and some people who don't. If I don't hear from you for a minute, I will reach out.
You will hit me up.
I'm like, hey,
hello.
You okay? And this is the struggle sometimes because I don't want people to feel like they have to see me. I just want people to know I'm thinking about you.
Yeah.
And if you need me, I'm here.
Yeah. And that has actually been very critical for me because you're like, hello, how you doing? And I'm like, wow, what a coincidence. Not well. It's probably like 9.5 times out of 10 when you haven't heard from me in a while and you go, hey, how's it going? And I'm like, oh, it's actually trash. That reminds me, I should probably make a session. It happens every time. And that's really, I think, actually what happened. And the reason why I got back into therapy was that it was like a year later and you would hit me up. And it does come across as you were genuinely like, hey, literally just checking in. Hope you're good. And I think I've actually had a couple of other people who have mentioned that who you've worked with who was like, yeah, I heard from George the other day. And I'm like, yeah, he does that. He does that. But it's been so helpful.
And I appreciate that because I never really know how it comes across because as you know, you learn in the field like there's these power dynamics and there's ways that people can feel and not wanting to make anyone feel forced, but also wanting people to feel seen and cared for. Right. And so sometimes I'm like, look, I'm just going to be me. And the way I would be me is that I would just hit somebody up. Yo, you okay? I'm just like, I'm checking in. And then sometimes people will say, most of the times people say, tag, man, are you like,
how'd you know?
Right. Stop it. And then like when I tell my kids, like, well, one of my superpowers is I can read people's minds.
Absolutely.
I want to keep letting them believe that as long
as Absolutely. Because that's exactly what you do. I'd have been like, yeah, sounds about right. That tracks. It's like to the day. Ironically, on the other end, when I end up having to when I catch it, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna set my appointment. I'm gonna be ahead of myself. Everything always, does this happen with your other clients where everything always seems to just calm down? So I almost never see you in the midst of things. It's always after the fact or right before the fact. And that's very frustrating. As a client, I'm naming that. It happens and it's very frustrating to me as a human.
I think it's a combination of the thought of like, hey, you know what? I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to do those things. It's like going to a medical doctor and being on top of your appointments actually keeps you aware of it. And you might be doing things leading into it. Like I'm actually going to exercise before I go see my doctor, right? I might actually drink all the water I'm supposed to drink. Like those things. And I think some of it happens with therapy too. Like I know I'm going to have an appointment. There is, for some folks, this thought of I probably shouldn't while out as much as I normally would, right? Because I know he's going to ask me, especially on those extremes. But sometimes, life just be flipping around and changing things up for us. And I like that when that happens. I like when people are like, you know what? Yeah, I've been good. I'm like, great. Let's talk about the good.
Yeah.
It always have to be the bad stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we had a solid period of time where I was like, I'm actually okay. That was a nice time.
And I love that time because those times allow us to say okay, well, how did we get here? What did we do? How do we maintain this? How do we keep this mindset? Because we know life is going to life. Yeah. And sometimes it's going to shift around, but we got to get back to or somewhere close to this place.
Yeah. And I think one of my other questions that I've actually always been curious about was around how do you feel obviously I'm different because I'm just super special. Right. But what do you feel is the difference between working with clients who may not have a mental health background versus some who who have a mental health degree, health background? I think we joked off on the recording that I was like, yeah, I don't think we ever really have to worry about that here when the camera turns on. I don't think anybody's confused who's the professional in this space currently.
No, you know what? I think that over the years, once again, I've gotten to know your gifts, your talents, your abilities, your knowledge, and I respect that. I respect how you've combined that with entrepreneurship, how you've combined that with organizational ability, how you've been able to add assistance and develop and build. And so I think that as a professional, I just respect you and how you show up. I think in terms of therapy, I'm just not thinking about that. I mean, there was a point in my career where I remember the first time I saw a psychiatrist as a client. Oh, I was in my feelings. I was like, am I doing anything? Am I saying anything? I remember the first time I saw a psychologist and someone who was also seeing clients. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. Right. But then I just started to get to the place where, and I think just over time and experience, I've seen people, thankfully, in all walks of life literally people who could consider themselves a billionaire, people who consider themselves they have no money at all, living on the streets in a shelter. And I've seen the gam, from one side to the other. I've seen people of different races, from different countries, and different occupations. And I think that has just allowed me to just see people. And I think with you and I, because we have that, like, I know when you put your professional hat on and when we're talking business and when we need to talk through some of that, and some of that excites me too. So I'm like, hey, let's talk about where are you in the business? Let's do that. Uh, but I think, at the same point, like when we're doing the work, I think you respect me and what I have to offer. So it's like, it's not a competition. I don't feel I need to prove myself, and I don't think you feel like you need to prove yourself. So we just talk.
Yeah, I think like you said, when I have the professional hat on, it's like you said, it's very much it very much feels different in a good way because the energy shifts into that more like solution oriented partnership thing where it's like we're on reflection. That cat flies off. I'm like, mental health who? I'm just little old Morgan. Which in and of itself, I think is more to the testament of our relationship, our rapport, and your ability to create that space where I don't have to feel like, what approach is he using? Like, I don't have to necessarily figure out what you're doing to help me navigate because I can just be my fullest self. And I think, especially as somebody who is in a care centric profession, who has that background, who is doing that for other people, both personal life and in my professional life, when it comes to caring and supporting other people, it's very helpful and very affirming to have a space where I can ramble, I can wall out, I can be this person. And I think even in the space between, I think these episodes, we were going to be like, who are we talking to right now? Like, who is this human that got on the screen?
And with that, I think that what I've valued many things, but in our relationship, being able to share with you that you don't have to be perfect, right? Like that you could be a hot mess.
What a concept. What a concept.
I think that you've really felt like, oh yeah, I could be a hot mess, right? And for someone like you, for someone like me, in the ways that we might have experienced life and people around us, being a hot mess, being not perfect, wasn't the message that you received or I received. So being in a space where we create that it's okay to like have really messed it up, right? To really like made the wrong decision in the moment, and it's okay. And that you've been willing to say, yeah, I did, and then now I knew what I was doing, and I still
and
did
I still did it.
So what?
And that's growth.
Right. And it is. And I think that's the type of environment that we've been able to really co-create. I appreciate like what you're saying about what I've been able to do. I think also we match, right? Like I bring a certain energy to people and a certain energy to my work. But then when people bring an energy to me, oh, it's a catalyst and we're on another place. And so I appreciate that we've been able to do that and create that space.
Yeah. And I think also in naming the normal and normalizing the fact that that doesn't happen with every client and that doesn't happen with every therapist, and finding your best fit can also look different. Like, you might have had a favorite client before, and now look, I've held the mantle for so long. I just pour them. I don't know.
No one has an opportunity to take that spot.
So sorry.
And even, I was joking earlier about you cheating on me, but I would encourage people that it's important to find your fit. Like to your point, like sometimes your fit changes over time. Like it could be this person for a period of time and it's somebody else. It could be that you've kind of seen folks and you've kind of found someone. I feel like the therapist I am now, 20 years in, is similar and different than who I was 5, 10, 20 years ago. And somebody who I would have linked up with in the beginning may or may not kind of feel comfortable with me now. And so all of that is through kind of trying to figure out what's the best fit, but you don't know unless you try it.
That is very true. And as we were wrapping up, I would love it if you could like give folks maybe one final thing or something that you feel like they should take away when it comes to finding a therapist, sticking with a therapist, building a therapeutic relationship. What is something that they should hold on to as they're going through this process?
Yeah, the first thought that comes to mind, especially thinking about our relationship, is that just because it worked for me doesn't guarantee it will work for you, but you should still try it, right? You know me, and so referrals is a really big thing. And having somebody who's had that experience is better than, in my opinion, finding them online, finding them like throwing something against the wall. That can work. But if you hear somebody's lived experience and they say, this is how I've interacted with this person, that might be a good reason to try. And at least then, if it doesn't work for you, you know more of what you want versus what you don't want. Just yesterday, I had a client and they had experiences with other therapists. And I'm always trying to ask them what worked with the previous therapist and what didn't, because that helps me to know where I need to be or if I can even be what they're looking for. Sometimes I might like, oh yeah, you're just going through therapists. I'm not going to see you. And other times I might like, oh, you needed care and you didn't get that.
You didn't get it.
And that's my sweet spot. Let's go. Right. So I think in people looking for therapists, trust the referral source, try it out for yourself. If it doesn't work, use that as help to figure out what you like from what you don't like as you continue your search to find someone.
Yeah, I think that's super important. Like you said, if just because I think we're starting with referrals is hands down to me, I think the best because you're getting trusted recommendation from a trusted person, a perceivable trusted person. And even if that's not the best fit for you, it can get you one step closer because like you said, even for you as a therapist, having it be like, I may not be the best fit and I know folks who may be, or here's another list of folks you can go down. Or here's a connection to somebody that you may not have had access to or may not have even known existed had it not been for that first resource. So I think that is great. Dr. George James, thank you so much for being here, for sharing, for being transparent about our experience, about your experience with me, with your other clients. If anybody would like to learn more about Dr. George and what he does, I will have all of that in the show notes and the details there. Definitely give him a follow. We'll have all that information there. If you are looking for a therapist or want to know what it's like to be with one or what questions to ask when you get there, you can go to our website, A.Little.Mental.org, and you can follow us on social media on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram at A.Little.Mental. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to be kind to yourself today. Thanks for getting a little mental with me today. If you would like to find more resources, visit A.Little.Mental.org, and remember, be kind to yourself today.